Going to tell us about how you almost got everybody killed.
That's right. Well, I come out of Southern Illinois and volunteer for the Air Corps after having persuaded them that it didn't matter that I had a heart murmur and that I was underweight. So they took me in anyway. And then what happened was I got my training as a navigator, which was a member of a crew, a multi-passenger crew, so to speak, or multi-members, several members in the crew. Usually a pilot, co-pilot, engineer, and then depending on what you're doing, there's bombardiers and so forth, and gunners. Anyway, I had this. I became a navigator. I was rather good as a navigator, as a matter of fact, because it had quite a bit to do with mathematics, and there was no problem. Well, eventually the war ended, and I ended up in Guam, the island of Guam, in the Pacific. And what we were doing out there was we were taking B-29s that had been used during the war, out there, used in the war against Japan, and refurbishing them, so to speak, fixing them up for the flight back to the United States, where they would be stored somewhere in the southwest part of the country. Whether anybody ever did anything with them again, I have no idea. But anyway, that was our thing. And of course, by this time, people were eager to get out, and so we didn't have all the skilled personnel around that we usually had, and we had to do our own maintenance. Mm. And I was in charge of putting an engine on one of our airplanes, for example. Others had other duties. All right. Any questions so far?
So you had to refurbish these planes and fly them back?
Fly them back to the States.
And then you could come back and do refurbish another
and
plane
and
fly that one back?
Yeah, that's right.
I see.
Okay.
So how many, in total, how many sorties did you do like
Maybe
this?
half a dozen
okay,
at most.
Fine.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm with you so far.
Okay. So we did that, and we were, quite good at it. Well, while we were there, we did other things, such as go out on a search mission. We went to find somebody who went down over by Formosa, and then we landed in Okinawa, and I was in the officers' club that night, and there was a card game going on, and there was a man there that was just remarkably violent in his language, obscene and so forth and so on. And I asked, this is in the officers' club. Well, who's that? Well, that's our chaplain. So for some reason or other, that's the way the chaplain was, or at least they said he was. Anyway, we were there, and we had a plane that we just fixed up. And we fixed it up not only by, for instance, my mission was to get that engine on using a manual and say, well, this goes in here and this goes in there. But also, we had extra Bombay tank put in for gasoline. Okay? In other words, we're going to have extra gas so we can have longer flights. Instead of having bombs up back there, we had the tank. And so that was one of the things that happened on that flight. Well, I was very young, 19, 20, maybe 21, I don't know. And the thing that particularly challenged me was the prospect of a flight all the way from Guam to Honolulu, to Hawaii. You take off from Guam, fly down to Kwajalein, turn, everything's okay, yes, well, let's go on then, make a turn, and then go up to. That was a very long flight, unusually long, and I thought it would be very nice to really navigate such a flight, okay? And so I was the one pushing to go all the way to Honolulu, to Hawaii. And so we filled up our tanks in the Bombay and elsewhere. What would happen is we would use the gasoline in the wing tanks, and once that was used up, there would be gasoline transferred from the Bombay tanks into the wing tanks, and then sent to the engines. And so we took off. The pilot was an old man, maybe 27, 28 years old. He had the distinction of having been shot down over Burma, and we thought that was a great, something to be celebrated. Anyway, we took off. Now, the critical thing about this whole story is it's raining. It's raining as when we take off, or at least once we get up to altitude, and we're just moving along. But it's raining, not awful rain, but rain. And we were moving along, and we used up the gasoline in the wing tanks. Okay, and so then we switched over and transferred from the Bombay tanks for the second half of the trip, which was from Kwajalein up again, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, what happened then was the Bombay tanks were being emptied. We can confirm that by going down into the Bombay and putting a stick in and finding out they're empty. But the problem was the registers for the wing tanks didn't show any extra gasoline.
They didn't appear to be filling up.
That's right, didn't appear to be filling up. But on the other hand, we were clearly emptying. And I remember, one of us, I forget who, went down into the Bombay to make sure. Yeah, well, they're emptying. We're all right. And so we were flying along, and we were quite, no problem at all. Still raining. And there's no indication that gas is being transferred into the wing tanks. But where is it? How could it be? It's not flooding the Bombay. It's not, so forth. So we pushed along, and I kept pushing to go all the way. That's a critical part of the whole business. Because I was very young, and this was been one of the longer flights in such an airplane at that time. And it was nighttime. We got to Kwajalein. We still had this question of where's the gasoline? It's still raining. And the pilot said, after we got to Kwajalein and turned and started up toward Hawaii, and we were going along nicely, and then the pilot says, "George, give me a heading back to Kwajalein." And this was put in such terms, or such tone, that there's no question about it. We're going to go back to Kwajalein. He'd been thinking about it. He was older. He didn't have my enthusiasm for this extraordinarily long flight, and so we turned back to Kwajalein. And of course, I was terribly disappointed. After all, I wasn't going to have a chance like this for a while. Well, we landed. Now, when we landed, however, he almost killed us. He almost killed us, because whenever we landed, I always read up, sat in front in the bombardier seat, because I wanted to see what was happening. And I could see as we pulled into the runway at Kwajalein, where in Kwajalein the runway ran into the water. That's at the level it was. And I could see in front of me a pair of lights zigzagging back and forth. And somebody evidently didn't like what we were doing. He himself considered himself vulnerable because of something was happening down there. I didn't know what it was really, but I could see this movement. And the co-pilot, a fellow named Souza, a distant relative of the composer, said, Steve, you're too low, And Steve pulled back, and the plane just shuddered. deciding whether to take hold and go around again or crash into the water. Right? So that's where we were. Well, fortunately, it took hold, and we went around and we landed. Well, then the question becomes what?
Is there any gas in the place?
Yeah. That's right. We went back into the Bombay, no gas. We got on top of the airplane in the rain, sticked it, no gas. If we'd have gone on, we would have crashed within an hour out of Kwajalein in the dark. I mean, that would have been the end, right? And it was just simply, we didn't know what the situation was. We didn't know how come this was happening this way. Well, so a tanker came out from the plane, from the base. They were very curious about what happened to us, and they filled it up again in the Bombay. And then they transferred it. And after they finished transferring it, it was empty in the Bombay, but it was also empty in the wing tank.
Mm.
And there we are. We're standing around there. It's raining all around us. And where in the world have these thousands of gallons of gasoline gone? And what's happening here? And so we filled it up again. The Bombay tanks, and we transferred it again. At which point the rain stopped, and we saw the gasoline just coming out, just a torrent of gasoline coming out. And whoever had put in the the thing in the Bombay had switched it the wrong way, and instead of going into the Bombay, into the wing tanks, it was going out into the water, into the ocean. And because of the rain,
You couldn't see it.
we hadn't seen it all day. All right? And of course, that solved the question. Of course. I mean, we stayed overnight and we fixed that thing. And well, the conclusion of this was, I was in the men's room, cleaning up, getting ready to go to bed after all this, and there was a man in there, said, "Boy, I've been through a lot in this war, but I've never come as close as I did tonight to getting killed." I said, "What happened?" He says, "Well, I was officer of the day. I was in my Jeep. I was patrolling the way the officer of the day does. And as I was going along near the runway, here comes this airplane that's bearing down on me, and I can't get away. I go this way and this way, and of course it was our plane. I didn't say anything.
No, of course not.
I didn't say, I'm the one that almost got you killed. You see, but anyway, I found out from him that he thought this was the worst thing he'd encountered throughout the war, because he thought he was gone. Well, one consequence of this was that neither the pilot nor I said anything about this afterwards. I almost got us killed by insisting to go on, and he almost got us killed by the way he landed. And that meant, of course, that both of us sort of agreed that maybe here the best thing is just simply not say anything more about it. And that was our adventure where I almost got us killed, but he in turn almost got us killed, and so it sort of washed out. And so I never made that flight all the way to Hawaii.
Well, you wouldn't have made it then either.
I wouldn't have known. If we'd have gone ahead, we would have gone into the water. I mean, if we had the gas to go, but we didn't have the gas. So that was what happened to us. So there you are, all right? My incompetence, ultimately. Incompetence because I should have had more sense than to run a risk like this. But a couple of years later, when I was stationed in Egypt, I was on the base there, the air base, and I happened to be down at the headquarters, the base, when word came in that somebody had had gone down in the desert on one of our planes, and we had to go out to set up search crews. And I was there, and the commander of the base was there, and so I volunteered to go with him as his navigator. Okay, and so we took off, and what you do is you get to an area of your area of a certain range, and you just keep going around squares to cover your area. And so we had an area in the desert to cover, and I said to him, "Sir, he was a colonel or general or something. What do you estimate the visibility to be today?" And he said, "Shall we say 20 miles?" Okay, very good. And so I worked away at my maps and gave him a map in which it gave the headings to be taken for this series of squares, ever-growing squares, that we would follow. And he said to me, "Lieutenant, I said 20 miles, and you have these runs 40 miles apart." Right?
Yeah,
And you know
you
the
can
answer to
you
that
see
was,
from both directions.
"That's right."
Hmm?
I said, "Well, he said, yes, sir, but you see, we get 20 miles when we go down this way, and then when we come back, we'll get the other 20 miles. And he looked at me, and I got a top rating on my service at that base because of that episode.
Because he hadn't thought of that.
Huh?
'Cause
no,
he hadn't thought
no,
of it.
he had never thought of it, and most people had never thought of it. But I remember something in one of the manuals when I was a student that there was this problem here and what was interesting about that was
But Stephen, you could see a down plane from 20 miles away?
whatever the
That seems so hard to believe, yeah.
whatever the distance was.
I know, I understand.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know what. First of all, I didn't know what altitude we were flying at. I mean, I don't remember now. But anyway, it was a plausible distance that we were assuming, but he thought only half of it should be assumed. And what was kind of interesting about it was a time when they were really downsizing the Air Corps, and people were being let off who wanted to stay in. Well, perversely enough, I could have stayed in because he really was impressed by what I had done, but I had no desire to stay in permanently. And within a relatively short time, I was on my way home because they were, it was obvious I wasn't going to stay indefinitely. So there I was much more competent than I had been when I tried to kill us all off.
Yeah.
Okay, there we are, Hamid. We have two stories, the good and the bad.